Ministry. If you hold it too close, it's muffled, but you gotta speak up and hold it right. Oh, I'm so excited. Everybody's here. It's fantastic. That goes to show that we're into some gardening. How many of you have gardens? All right. Had? Okay, but yeah, you're just recently moved here, so you're going to work on getting one going, okay?
You stole my first question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to...
Let's try it again. How many people have gardened over 50 years? I know we got at least one, two. Do we have anybody that's less than 10? Less than 5?
Is yours on?
New. Good. You put it.
I think his needs to be up, or is it on?
It's on?
Okay. Let's start with a word of prayer. Father God, thank you so much for creating such wonderful nature and the opportunity to learn about some things outside that we can grow and eat and enjoy. Thank you for everyone that was able to come today. Lord, bless those that may be still coming. Open our hearts and minds. Send the Holy Spirit to guide us as we learn today. And we praise you and thank you for this opportunity to be here on this sunshiny day. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Okay. Before I steal any more of your questions.
So first of all...
Actually, one more thing.
He
is going to... We want questions, but we want you to use the mic. I will bring it to you. Just raise your hand so I can come to you. That's so that those people, there are some online, and they want to be able to hear those questions too. Sorry.
Okay. So we're going to start from the beginning. As I always tell people, I can plant seeds, I can water seeds, but I cannot make them grow. So we have to put credit where credit's due. This is a God thing. So when I first started this, it was actually my dad that got me into it. He had a garden. I was probably about 5, so I'm a 50-plus-year-old or 50-plus club member of the gardening disease. I guess we should all hold our heads and say, hey, I'm a gardener, you know. But he made sure that we were very successful. He gave us a premium spot in the garden, and we grew something that would never die, the Tiny Tim tomatoes. And so when we brought them to the table, it was always my brother and I, whoever brought their vegetables to the table, this was done by you, so there was a lot of positive reinforcement, and we just fell in love with it. So for the newbies out there, first thing you want to do when you get started, and you're going to figure out where you're going to put your garden, nothing grows without sunlight. You need to have a spot that has a minimum, I like at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sun. I was fortunate that where we live at, we have plenty of land. And the things that you don't know that you know now, I saw a lot of this stuff growing. And I thought, wow, this is really some good looking stuff. I had this in cedar trees. I found out later that this stuff and cedar trees only grow in extremely poor soil. So I had a lot of work to do. This is going to be an interactive thing. I want you guys to come up here and feel all these different soils and things. This is basically what I started with. It is like a nasty clay. There's like very little nutrition in it. So where do we get from there to the good stuff? And the key to a lot of this stuff is just adding a lot of organic material. And I brought a lot of things with me that you can add. There's a lot of tests. First thing I would do before you're starting a garden is you have your area. You've already, I should have brought another towel. You should have an area that you've already checked to make sure that you have plenty of sunlight. That's the number one thing. Number two thing, you need an area that does not set in water. After you've had a good rain, if you're sitting in water, you're going to have trouble. If you have very limited spots of where you can put things, then I would go with a raised bed if you're stuck with an area that's low. You can easily build up your soil by using, and I do not like to use any type of treated woods or materials that way. I prefer either block or stone or something like that that you can build it up on treated wood. We just built his bed with untreated wood. We got some natural wood and built that up about 6 inches, so you don't have to worry about problems that way. So the first thing I would do once you start testing your soils, and we have a number of test kits out there. We have these that take forever to do, but they have, you can test your pH, and you can test your nitrogen, your potassium, and your phosphorus. So you need to know where your pH lies before you even start. For most vegetables, you need to be around a 6.5 to a 7. There are certain things that like to go lower than that, but if you stay in that range, it will allow all of your nutrients to be absorbed by the plants. You can have the most fertile soil, but if your pH is off, the plants can't absorb that. So once you've done your pH, you can adjust it 2 different ways. I do everything pretty much organically. I don't like to use chemicals. So all my fertilizers and things that I use are organic. If my pH is too high, which we usually don't have to worry about in Ohio, you would add some sulfur for it. You would need this if you're doing like blueberries. Blueberries need like a 5.5 to a 6. They really like acidic soil. To do that naturally, I use, there's a ton of horse farms around here. And the horse bedding material is rough sawdust. And they can't use treated sawdust because it messes up with the horses. So that is a great, because it's full of manure and they have piles of it and signs that say free, come get it. That's the best stuff, but you need to let it sit for at least a year and compost it, or you'll have more weeds than you ever thought were possible. Next thing we need to do. What I did was I took some soil, and it's still taking a little bit of time to completely sift her out, but I started this last night. So you take some soil and you fill it in some water and you swish it around really well and get everything mixed up. And we're going to run this through the room. You can see the different layers. So everything that you see cloudy on the top is more of a clay-like. Everything on the bottom is sand, and the dark level in the middle is the good stuff. That's your loam, and I have some loam on top, and we're just going to run that around. You guys can pass that around, just have a look so you can see.
Trust us not to shake it.
If you shake it, then the people on the end will not get to see it.
Is there a amount of time that needs to sit in the water?
Clay can take several days to finally filter down, and you need to measure your amounts of each. If you have a large amount of clay, which is what I started off with this, you've got a lot of work to do. The things to naturally amend that is play sand. And I buy a lot of play sand. You can get it actually at there's a place in Lebanon, an actual working sand and gravel mine where they bring that up, and you want the fine play sand to add to the soil to bring that up. And the other thing that I use a lot of to add my loam is peat moss. I love peat moss. You can buy this in big old giant bricks. It's about 30 pounds. It's a big old thing, and it's wonderful stuff. The peat moss not only breaks up the soil, we'll start off with the sand. The sand helps the clay attaches to the sand, and it gives you drainage. The whole thing is getting drainage because you don't want anything to sit in your soil. You want the water to be able to pass through. With your peat moss, it not only breaks up the soil, but if you have a dry summer, the more organic material you have, which I use leaves and run those through the lawnmower and bag them up. And you can put those on the next day, or the next year. You can use your grass clippings. If you're going to do a compost, you're going to need to mix what we call wet or green and dry materials. So you would do a layer of like either manure or grass clippings, and make sure if you use your grass clippings, they are not treated, because if you have your grass clippings that are treated with some type of chemicals, you're going to have weed killers in there, and it's going to kill all your vegetables. So you need to make sure that you get those from a good spot. So you mix, layer about 2 inches of each of alternate of like straw, grass, then manure, then leaves, and just keep alternating that. And once, the best way of setting that up is they use a 3-bin method, and each bin's whatever size you want it, but usually it's like a 3x3, 4 foot by 4 foot, and you have 3 bins. You fill up the first bin, and once that's full, you take your pitchfork, throw it into the second bin and fill that up. Once that's full, you move that one over here, flip them over, and once that's full, usually the end one's ready to be used. Just alternate. Alternate the green material, which is your manure and your grass, with your dry stuff, which is your leaves and your straw. Make sure you use straw and not hay, because hay has seeds. This weekend was an example of why we don't want to get in too much of a rush to get stuff planted. Anything that you had in the ground Friday is now most likely dead after the 15-degree temperatures, unless you had a greenhouse or had some way of keeping it warm. So for those that are antsy, I love these things. These are little peat pots, and you can take this plastic off, flip it over, and once you hydrate these, you have like a little mini greenhouse. This is a good way to get your seedlings going. I personally like to grow my own stuff from seed. Paulette has a wonderful, where's your book at? I was going to show that real quick. She has a wonderful seed catalog that I guess I shouldn't actually say this in church, but I almost stole this from her. This thing is the whole seed.
And if he did,
catalog.
I knew where to get another one.
That's right. This thing has seeds that you only dream of. The nice thing is they're not, you want to pass that around?
Yeah, let's start it here.
They're not organically modified. So, you know you're going to get a good product.
Another one here.
If you're wanting to save your own seeds, there's 2 things you need to be concerned about. You need to make sure that you have a seed that's called an heirloom, and you need to make sure that you're not growing different varieties but of the same family. Because like if you have 4 different tomatoes, they're going to cross-pollinate with each other. So if you're actually wanting to save the seed, you would have to use a Q-tip and pollinate your own flowers and then bag that and save that particular fruit. You wouldn't do the whole plant, but just strictly, okay, designate this is going to be your seed. Otherwise, you're going to get crossover.
Okay, another thing about seeds, that seed catalog, it's an Adventist-owned company, number 1. Number 2, we visited them in Mansfield, Missouri, and it was awesome. There was a number 3. What else was I going to share about it?
They have their kids involved.
He started when he was 17 years old. So he's been doing it for a long time. They have grown to the point where now they have a warehouse in California. So when we visited, the lady that was in the store, I asked her, I said, so we have some pretty good sized tomatoes that we got from some friends. Their seeds have been around for 100 years or so. She said, here's this one right here. I got a little packet. She said they're between 4 and 5 pound tomatoes. I can't wait to get some started.
Bragging rights.
Yeah.
So we've already tested. First thing we do is we test our pH. The problem is you needed to have started adjusting that in the fall. So now, springtime comes. I have this lovely little thermometer. It's got about a 6-inch probe in it. You need to stick this in the ground, and you do not want to plant anything until this hits close to 60 degrees. There are a few seeds, like peas and radishes, that can handle cold weather, but you want the ground temperature warm or your seeds are going to get wet and they're going to rot. So make sure that you have your soil temperature at least 60 degrees. Okay, I need a volunteer to come up here and play in the dirt. No one wants to get their hands dirty? Come on up. So one of my favorite sayings is, you do not want to even work in the soil until it breaks apart like chocolate cakes. If you're going to go over here, just make a ball. And if it doesn't break apart, then we know it's too wet and too cold. So you just make a ball and just, there you go. That's it. Don't compact it too much. And then we just go like this. So that's perfect. This is like the perfect dryness. It's got enough warmth to it. This is workable soil. If you needed to add more to it, this is, no, you get to play with more. We're going to have you just mix all that. Now, if you don't like to get your hands dirty,
that's all right.
I have tools for this. I have two of my favorites of hand tools. This one here has been with me for years. I love this thing because it has, and then you could add some more. I'd add some sand to that. We're going to make this like the primo of primos. Okay, that's good. And you just mix that up. And if you want to use your fingers, you go right ahead. So this is like a perfect seed bed for just about anything that you're going to deal with. And this stuff here is what it started off with. That's the amazing thing. It's just by adding a ton of organic material. I talked about using organic all the way. Who here has a really good sense of smell? Raise a hand. Come on, I need a volunteer. I'm going to pick on you because I know you. Oh, no. Ooh, this smells good.
Okay.
Take a big breath. What do you smell? Doesn't that smell wonderful?
That's what you want to call it.
Yeah, I knew that. This is nasty stuff. This is crushed sea kelp. Any of your organic fertilizers, like if you look on a bag of fertilizer of commercial, it's going to have 12, 12, 12, which is telling you how much nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus you have in the bag. So you would have 12 pounds on a 100-pound bag, you'd have 12 pounds of each, and the rest would be filler. Very easy to over-fertilize. I had somebody tell me, well, my plants don't grow, and I dumped a whole half a bag, 50-pound bag on this plant, and nothing happened. I'm like, well, yeah, you over-fertilized it. Yeah, something happened. It's just nothing good. So if you use, like this is my kelp, this one here, and I won't make anybody smell this one. This one actually smells worse. This is another organic fertilizer, and instead of triple 12, and this is my homemade compost, the organic fertilizer has a rating of 1, 0, and 8. And the kelp, this is really nutritious. This is 1, 1, 1. So the nice thing about this is you can put a lot of this stuff on it. You're not going to burn up your soil and this, or burn up your plants, and this stuff is like ready available to the plant. As soon as you put it on there, it can start using it, but it lasts a little bit. And the nice thing is you're building up your soil for the future. That's the whole point of doing organic, is to be able to build it up. Everything that we put in, it's a continual process. You can take a foot of organic material, put it on your garden, and within 2 years, you now have 1/8 of an inch. It goes down that quick. So it's a constant thing, which is good because that way we get to get rid of all of our organic material.
I was told that the ashes from a wood-burning fire was good for your soil, is it?
Okay, repeat that question. You did, that's all right.
I got the microphone.
That's all right.
Is ashes from a wood-burning fire, after they've obviously cooled, good for your...
Yes and no. It all depends what you're burning, and it all depends if you're using a stove or not. If you get a lot of creosote that stays in there, you're going the wrong way. If you use do an outdoor fire that's just wood, like twigs and stuff, that is just like awesome stuff. That's free lime for your soil. That's going to change it from an acid to an alkali.
Okay, you're planting, you're putting a seed in the ground. You're gonna fertilize at the time you're planting or later?
Before.
Before I even put the
Before
seeds in?
before I put the seeds
Well,
in.
no wonder they all died.
Well, you got to understand something. Your roots are below the soil. So I take this lovely tool right here, and once I have take me a few seconds.
So are you?
I use bricks for my beds. So I'm looking for my picture of my bed.
So are you saying that, do you fertilize your whole garden or just where you're going to put your seeds?
Because I'm using beds, I fertilize the bed. Okay, this is what my bed looks like. This is 4 foot by 20 foot. And this is brick. This is about a foot above the soil level.
Start your phone down there and.
Oh, we're going all the way around. He's
See,
seen
I
it.
told you we should put the TV in.
Okay, so this is, as I said, this is about a foot up. My goal this year is to make this 50 foot for this year. So I have a lot of bricks to lay. So once I have an idea, I just start sprinkling in my fertilizers because it's all contained. And that's the thing that I like about a bed, is with a bed, you do not have erosion from rain losing. You guys have seen it. He's my bragging buddy. You don't have loss of your nutrition by erosion. So beds are great because it keeps everything in there. And I like brick.
Put it right here. Back up just a little bit. Perfect. Thank you. Okay,
Got it?
got it.
I like brick because it breathes. I lay my bricks dry, so I have nothing, I don't have mortar in between them. So if I get a really heavy rain, everything's going to overflow out the sides a little bit as far as the overabundance of rain, like when we have floods in the springtime.
So you're not talking about bricks, you're talking about block,
No, these are bricks.
concrete block?
These are bricks.
Okay.
I found
By 2.5 inch?
2 inch by 4 inch by
Yeah.
8 inch.
Yeah.
I found a building that was being demolished, and I got permission, and I hauled about 10 pickup truck loads of bricks. They thought I was crazy, but is great for that. So anyway, first thing we do is we've got our temperature right, and then we put in our amendments, either compost or your peat moss. Make sure that you have enough sand contents, that you have good drainage, lime if you need it, and then you add in your fertilizers, whatever you want to use, and then you use this lovely little tool and just gently scratch it into the soil. The thing is, your garden has already been raked out. Here's some of my favorite tools. This is for starting from scratch. The thing about this is you can get in really deep and you can wiggle your soil back and forth. On my beds and stuff, I try to avoid using a mechanical tiller, because if you use a tiller, it's a wonderful thing if you're doing something big that's hasn't been worked, but the problem is you've also destroyed your ecosystem. You've chopped up all your worms, which worms are a great fertilizer, and they make holes through the soil and they aerate it. So I use this rascal gently just to make my rows and stuff, but if I'm actually going to till up my soil, I initially use this one, and I love this thing because it gets in deep and it's angled so that you can pull the dirt back to you, and once I have everything tilled as deep as I want it, then I use this one and just rake it out nice and smooth. Once it's all raked out smooth, then I put in my soil amendments, and then I use that little hand rake to just gently work that in. You want to get your stuff about an inch below the soil so that when your seeds start to germinate and they start shooting down roots, you want everything where the roots are going to be. Yes?
I have a question.
Mike?
I guess it was just YouTube videos or something. I saw, like with raised bed gardenings, they were like layering stuff, and I don't remember all the layers, but they were starting out with like cardboard that was not like treated, not any finish on it, but then they were layering newspapers and a lot of twigs and things like that before they got up to the top layers where they were. Is that a good way to start?
I don't like the idea of using newspapers because what's on newspaper? Ink and all these chemicals. I'm trying to stay away from chemicals. So I really have a thing against chemicals. Something else that I use a lot of, and I forgot to bring my pictures of that because I was hauling all this stuff in the last couple of days. I use a lot of weed control fabric. I'm not going to put a plug in for any particular store, but I go and I buy it in a 4-foot tall, and it's 220 feet long, and you just roll this out. And one of my next most used tools is this little rascal right here. You take and you lay your weed fabric down, you cut it off appropriately, and then wherever you're putting your plants, you make a nice little cross, pull that back, and then you don't have to weed your whole garden, you only have to weed where the plant comes up. So that's one way that you can take a larger garden and cut your weeding time significantly. So, as I said, I have all these amendments and stuff that you add to your dirt. The idea is just every year to try to add to it. As I said, the place that I bought initially, I was blessed with lots of sunshine. I had great drainage. The problem was that it was owned by a guy who rented it out to a farmer who strictly put in chemicals, tilled it, put in chemicals, and then the erosion, whenever it would rain, it washed all the topsoil. So that's why I grew this in cedar trees the first couple of years. It took probably 7-8 years just to get started. Yes?
When you use leaf mulch, do you use sand with it?
I like to
use leaf mulch, do you use sand with it?
You don't have to. If you take your leaves and run them through a lawnmower with a bagger, that's what I like to do initially because that's going to cut your decomposition time down significantly. And you can use like what you get in the fall, you put it in a pile, make sure it's wet, and put some layers with some grass clippings. You could use that next spring. Okay, that's what I got. Now I'm ready for
You
questions.
want to talk about test?
Okay, so we talked about the soil test. I was looking them up because I thought that I had one accessible to me, and I didn't. So I had a couple of these chemicals. She has one, and I have one. We can actually just run this around the room. What this does is this thing has...
Where do you get these?
I got this one at Lowe's. It's cheap. It's only like $6.
I got mine from Amazon, so.
I would rather get one that has a probe that you just stick it in and it will digitally tell you everything, because seeing different variances of color with my old eyes is not what it used to be. So we have these here. Yeah. So you have to differentiate the different colors to tell what your pH is, to tell what your nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus is. Now, the reason why we want to know what all these levels are
Here's the
is each
we'll send out.
of those has something different that the plant needs. For instance, we already talked about what the pH does. That allows your plants to accept the nutrients. So your nitrogen is very important for your dark green leaves, and that's also where you'll tell if you have a good iron content, because you'll need iron in your soil. Your potassium is good for root growth, and then your phosphorus is good for your fruits. So each one does something differently to nurture your plant along. We were talking about making sure that you have significant amount of sunlight. depending on what you want to grow. If you are stuck in an area that you are very limited on your sunlight, you're not going to be able to grow giant tomatoes. You would want to grow like leaf lettuce. You can grow some root crops. Your legumes, like your beans and peas and stuff like that, they are also sun lovers. Cucumbers are sun lovers. A lot of the stuff you need, as I said, at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight.
So would squash fall into the same category as
They
cucumbers?
love sun.
Yep.
That's all in the same family. They love sunshine.
Okay, now that it's spring, and we want to do this now, what would something like?
What does the thermometer say? I already told you. What does the
No,
thermometer
no,
say?
I don't mean today
Okay.
to do it, but I'm just saying if we're going to get started, you're
Right.
saying we should have made the amendments
Okay.
to our beds
So
last
first thing I would do,
fall.
first thing
Could-
I would do is test your pH.
Yeah, but I mean, could you use something like Miracle Grow soil?
That's a dirty word.
I'm sorry?
That's a dirty word.
Okay.
Anytime you use any type of chemical product like that, it is what I call put and take. When you use a Miracle Grow, it's a liquid. It's going to go right through the soil. You're not building up your soil. It's usually, Miracle Grow is usually like crystals.
Oh, I'm talking about the bags of soil, but that are Miracle
Well, you know
Grow
what? I have a
soils.
bag of soil, and it's not bad, but it's like, it's very expensive. And if you're going to put out a decent sized garden, you're going to need like 20, 30 bags, and they run you about $8 a piece.
Okay.
So
So what could they do now?
what I would do now is, first thing I would do is this. I would see what type of soil I have. I would take and put soil in a bottle of water like this, shake it up and let it sit for a couple days so that I see what I have. If you have very thick clay soil, you're going to have to break it up. One of the favorite things is chocolate cake. Your soil, when you make a ball like that, it should fall apart just like that. That's a really good mixture of a combination of ingredients. So that you're going to have good drainage with that. By having the peat moss, it's going to be able to keep the moisture in the soil, so you have the best of both worlds.
So if I'm going to start my seeds, when do I start them?
I actually was feeling like Nora, a little antsy, so I actually went to the greenhouse. They have not started their vegetables yet, and they will not start those for another 2 weeks. You want to be able to put out your vegetables around May 15, but we've had a few surprises the last couple years. It seems like our seasons have changed. Back 20 years ago, early May was warm weather. Now, it was, I think 2 years ago, May 17, we had below freezing weather. And I know this because I lost a lot of crops, like my asparagus crop. I grow a lot of asparagus, but it takes 4 years for asparagus to mature. So it's you don't plant asparagus unless you plan on living there for the rest of your life, because it just gets better with age. Same with your blueberries and stuff. Most of your bushes and your fruit trees, you're looking at a minimum of 5 years before you actually get a decent crop. Yes?
So with blueberries and such, should I trench the ground and then start making it more acidic if I have a really alkaline soil?
You shouldn't have to worry about too alkaline for blueberries. If you want to talk about blueberries, that's another 15-minute subject. I grow blueberries. You have to, if you really want to grow good blueberries, once you know what your soil pH is, I'm going to use the dirty word, you have to trench that, or not trench, you have to till that soil. You have to put in a lot of play sand. And you can either get it one way, shape, or form, because they do not like to have wet feet. They like to be in an area of good drainage, and so you're putting in a lot of play sand, you're putting in a lot of peat moss, and you're putting in a lot of 1-year-old or better of the horse manure, sawdust, getting that in there. Blueberries are very much a surface feeder. You have to have a minimum of 3 different varieties so that they cross-pollinate. Otherwise, you'll have a very poor yield. And you have to protect them because the birds just are so thankful that you grew blueberries just for them. This is my blueberry cage. This is 8 foot tall, 10 foot wide, 40 foot long, and I have bushes that are actually growing out over the top. On a good year, I will get several gallons per bush. Yeah. Well, you know, I'm actually getting into the vegetable business because more and more people are wanting good food. And so now that I have this framework, I put in I found some really nice heavy-duty netting because I normally used this fine bird netting, and last year I had a surprise. A deer decided that it wanted to go through and visit my blueberries, and it tore down all my netting. So I found this stuff that's heavy-duty. It's 1 inch, and so it's 7 foot by 100 foot. So I'm able to completely, you have to use metal at the base because rabbits, what can I say? Rabbits are just the evil of, they like to nibble all the way around your blueberry bushes and ring them and kill them.
For your beds, what's the ratio of topsoil that you put in when you're starting a bed? Like if I'm doing an in-ground bed, should I put 2 inches of topsoil if I want to start growing something, let's say this season?
Okay, so you're starting from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So did you catch the very beginning where you have an area that you're going to put this in that you have a minimum of 6 hours of sunlight?
Yes.
Okay, so if I'm going to start my bed and I'm starting from total scratch, I would do what they call, it's a lot of work intensive, it's called a double dig method. So what you would do is you would remove the grass and just, you take a shovel and you just mark it and then remove the grass, lay it over inside, and you do this in 2 foot wide increments and go as long as you want to go. And then you lay the grass aside and then you dig down 1 foot deep or at least a spade depth, get all that cleaned out, put that on a tarp. Then you put the grass back in green side down because that is your grass area, that top 2 inches of where the grass is very nutritious. So you put that down and then you would take whatever the soil is. If your soil is really nasty like this, then you would take and put it in a tub or something and mix in, you use your hoe and you mix in like sand, peat moss, whatever you need to get this to be a decent thing, and you fill that up. And then you just start flipping it over and you go in 10 foot or 2 foot wide as long as you want to go and just work your way down. It's very labor intensive. If you knew where you were going to put your garden last year during the fall, I would have gotten some black plastic and laid that out. And you can get that in, if you're going big, you can get that in 20 foot by 100 foot rolls. And you lay that out and put that where you want to have your garden months down the road, because what that does is the black will kill all the weeds and stuff in there. It'll kill all the grasses and weeds and stuff.
Yeah, so it looks like there was a previous garden where we're thinking about,
Okay.
but we tested the soil and it was pretty poor. It's pretty clay still,
Okay.
because they had put like maybe at 1 inch of topsoil when they did it the previous years, but it hadn't built up much, so.
So you would want to test your pH so you know what your pH is. And you should have run up here and play in the dirt when I got you a chance.
Oh, we were playing in dirt all day today.
So I would put in a lot of this stuff. Go ahead and stick your hands in there and feel how fine that is. Okay, that's going to break it up. And then you put in this stuff I would buy. How big are you talking? How big of an area are you talking?
So 35 by 32 feet.
Oh, you're ambitious. Okay, so you would want to use at least 3 or 4 bricks of this. And you're going to probably want to put in, do you have a pickup truck?
No.
Do you have that? Okay.
Yeah, we have access to it.
Access to one? There's a place in Lebanon. Otherwise, this is expensive. This is like $4.50 for 50 pounds. If you had access to a pickup truck. There's a place in Lebanon. It's called Odor's Sand and Gravel, and you would ask for fine sand. I would get 1,000 pounds of it and dump that in there and till that in. Because if you're going to have clay issues, you want to put in like an inch or two of that just to get started. Yes?
If you were starting a garden fresh over lawn, and instead of doing a bed like he was saying, if you're doing a raised bed, do you still do the complete grass removal first?
You would do the complete grass removal first. If I were going to do in a lawn area a raised bed and I were going to raise up my garden a foot, if the raised bed's coming up a foot, then all you would have to do is just remove that grass, flip it over, and then put all this good stuff on top of it. Because you really only need to go down. And once you remove your grass, you would take this thing and you start at the middle of the bed so that you don't step on what you've worked, and you stick this down all the way, and you're going to push this in that far, wiggle it back and forth, start at the middle, and then work your way to the edge and do that about every foot apart. You're going to do that both sides and flip around and go the other. And that will allow you to have loosen up your soil, because if it's been a yard like that, you're probably well compacted because people have run on it, played on it, run lawnmowers and stuff. So that's the first thing you want to do.
Randy,
Yeah.
from experience, I can tell you that if you just put netting over your bushes, they'll tear holes in it, the wind and so on. And cardinals and robins will go through a hole this big and get at your blueberries. And they can't get out.
Yeah.
And his way of covering up, having a big shield over it, I gave up.
That's the only thing that I found that really works.
The blueberries are beautiful in the fall. The bushes. In our house, all those.
So you're growing them for foliage, not to eat.
Pardon?
I said you're growing them for the foliage, not to eat. He's feeding nature. It's a lot of work to feed nature.
But a
And
few blueberries taste good.
I've been, was fortunate in that I have 6 different varieties of blueberries. And so I have early, and then they keep going, they come in, they're about a week apart. So when the early comes in, I have 2 of them that are semi-early, and they're about a few days apart, and then another 2 come in about a week or 2 later, and then another 2. Once you get more toward the middle of the season on the later varieties, those are your best berries. I've grown berries the size of a quarter, and they're as sweet as can be. But we're all dependent on 2 things: appropriate sunshine and appropriate rain. We don't always get both in Ohio. Hey, I like
Good.
questions.
Okay, I'm moving to a farm that was corn and soybean grown, so the dirt is dirt. It's terrible. What I want, I'm the one who's going to be manning the garden.
That's what I started with, yeah.
Exactly, that's exactly what's there. So I just shovel it up with your little thing, make my little patch, put all this stuff in it.
And my advice is, I always tell people, if you're starting, like this is a new area for you, start small. You can always add more,
okay.
but a smaller garden, 10 by 20, that is well tended, will produce more than a 20 by 40 that's neglected.
Okay, do you have yours fenced in to keep the deer? Because we're out in the woods with the deer. And they're going to come and eat everything that I plant. Is there any way to keep them at bay?
Unfortunately, I'm actually setting 12-foot telephone poles, and I'm putting in an 8-foot fence. That's the only way to keep deer out.
Well, we were successful in Florida with, a deer won't jump what they can't see. So what they did is they took clear fishing line and put it at chest level for the deer. and all the way around the garden. And it will work. Yep. Have you tried that, Randy?
I have not tried that.
Yeah, I have a friend in Florida that does that.
We have a question behind
Sorry.
you. Go ahead.
One more question. Hay bale gardening, do you know anything about it?
I don't like hay. Straw.
Straw bale, whatever.
Straw
I
works
j-
wonderful.
I don't like crawling around and bending over, it's hard on me.
So, I had because I work in physical therapy, and I had a patient who was handicapped, and so her husband built for her raised beds, and when I say raised beds, they were built up 2 feet off the ground so that she could work everything from a wheelchair. So she had about 18 inches of dirt that started 2 feet high that she could get her wheelchair to and do her business in the dirt. And she was extremely successful with that. So with your straw bale, what is your thoughts? What do you exactly, are you wanting to put dirt on straw bales, or what are you thinking?
I don't have any of it yet, I'm just thinking.
Okay. The problem with straw is once it's composted, it's only going to last a couple years because it's going to collapse on you.
I heard that.
You get lots of fungus in straw. If you have a wet straw bale, you're going to see mushrooms growing out of that thing like crazy. That's not the best thing for your garden. So,
Randy, Sterling has done some straw. Sterling, you want to talk a little bit about straw bales?
I've done straw bales for the last 4 years, primarily just for tomato plants. I have tried other things in it, but the tomatoes seem to be the best, although I've had some success with cucumbers. But there's a lot of initial work to straw bales.
yeah.
It's a lot of watering, a lot of fertilizing, and as you say, it grows a lot of mushrooms.
We had a question back over here, Paula.
Yeah, I do have a question. You were talking about keeping deer away. What about that spray? It's called Deer Stay Away. Because I had some gladiolas that the deers came and had lunch.
The problem with the sprays is that you have to keep on it. Every time it rains, that stuff's going down into the soil. A lot of the sprays that you buy that are deer away, it's like coyote urine or predator urine is what you're basically.
Smell like skunk.
Yes, it does. And so you're basically putting urine, so now you're adding more acid and nasty stuff around your soil. And if you're doing something that you're going to be eating, yeah. My thing is, I really like to use, I would rather use barriers. I had some success last year with, deer don't like new things. So I made some areas and I had this weed guard fabric that I hung from area to area so that every time the wind blew, this stuff would move back and forth. And they didn't like that at all. Surprisingly, if you had a little fenced-in run and had a little dog, that would do the trick. But then that's another.
Oh, talking about the deer, we've got deer in our neighborhood now. We hadn't had them before until last year. And the veteran company or whatever had torn up a lot of garden areas and put the strip through between my house and the neighbor's house. But we noticed that the deer were just took what little bit of garden I had left, and the tomatoes, they were just, they would just take a big bite out of the tomato and ruin your tomato. They did the same thing with Woodens, who live behind us. Just big bites out of their tomatoes and, left them on the ground. And so anyhow, I had a friend come and put up a 4-foot chicken wire, because that was all the fencing that they had at Lowe's at the time. And while we're putting it up to reestablish some garden space, the deer and her fawn come walking by, just ambling along, and she kind of turns to her fawn a little bit like saying, "Hey, no sweat for you, kid."
Yeah.
It keeps on going. Drive you nuts.
I have personally seen, otherwise I would not have believed it, So we're going to mark this off. So Paulette's going to be my fence. Stay right here.
Okay.
I saw a deer jump from here and clear a 4-foot fence that far away. And I had to walk it off because I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So like you said, if you just have a regular 4-foot fence and then put something above that's like the weed guard fabric that's just fluttering, because they don't like that, and they're like, okay, what's on the other side of that? Same thing, it's eye level, they can't get through that. Or they use, like, for horses, that white 2-inch tape that they put around. Of course, some of that stuff has voltage running through it. Those work really well. Yes, but you want something thick that they're going to see, because you're going to get them both with visual and with some electricity.
And 4 feet is nothing to them because
No,
we've got friends that they'll sail over 7 feet, no problem.
I've heard you have to have an 8-foot fence to keep them out.
Yeah.
I was going to ask microgreens. What seeds do you use to grow those?
She is the microgreen queen.
Oh, awesome.
Well, I sprout. I haven't been overly successful with microgreens, but there is a company, and I will have to get that website for you, where I did buy my microgreens from, and there are some really, really good videos on YouTube of how to do microgreens. They are nice, and yeah, I invested in the trays and the special wool batting to grow them in, but yeah.
Are those trays reusable?
Yes.
And that wool batting is reusable?
No. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Other questions? John?
You know, I understand that tomatoes shouldn't be planted in the same place should be 2 or 3 years before you plant them in the same place. What other things I think you're supposed to stay away from potatoes, and I don't know about pepper.
We want to rotate. I'm fortunate in that the area that I plant is good size and it's getting bigger. I keep an area, I have my garden is like 80 by 50, and it's going to stretch out, and that's just the garden, that's not counting all my asparagus beds. I'm putting in right now about a ½ acre. It's crazy.
That's why we ask you to come and talk about it.
We won't go into that. But so the reason I do that is I keep areas that I let rest. So if you do not have the space to let an area rest for a couple years, you can plant any legume anywhere. You can plant beans year after year after year after year in the same spot. So what you want to do is, like, if you have tomatoes in an area, then the next year you would want to come back with like beans, peas. And by the way, next week, for those of you that are really antsy and want to play in the dirt, we're supposed to have good weather, you can actually plant your peas. I planted peas last year, the 3rd week of March. And these are the sugar peas that have the big pods like that. And I had probably the best harvest I've ever had. So you would plant, like, after you have your tomatoes, you could plant like peas or beans. You could plant any of your cabbage family, but you'd need to stay away from the black nightshade family, which is your eggplant, your peppers, your tomatoes, and your regular potatoes, not your sweet potatoes, but your regular potatoes. You'd need to move this. So there's one of these. I have 4 books here, and I'm going to put in a plug for my favorite. We're going to run this up to the camera first.
Sorry, you can stand right there. There we go.
So this is where all my secrets are. This is, how many here have watched on PBS a gardening show called Crockett's Victory Garden, or have heard of it? Okay, so this is the guy that started that. I love this book. It starts off, and it's a calendar book, and it starts off in March. So it tells you, and I've seen these things online, you can buy them used for like $5, $10. this is the most invaluable gardening tool you'll ever have. It tells you what month, what you can grow. A lot of the tips that I've given you come straight out of here. I have a couple other books that I really like. This one here. It's a one-man thing. I've learned that the problem with gardening is I like to plant different things on top of each other. For instance, parsnips. Parsnips, you plant them in April and you harvest them in November. It takes over a month for those to germinate. So when I use those in the beds, and you have to have soil that you can just stick your hand in that deep without using any type of, they really like loose soil. So I have a bed that's specifically for, and the one that I showed you on my phone, the picture that I'd taken, that bed, I have issues because I'm organic, and I like to have worms in my garden because that's your best aerator and compost from what they give you. Moles like to come in and get those. So that bed I dug down, it's almost 20 inches deep. I removed 70 to 85-gallon buckets of dirt by hand, laid down chicken wire, and then put in construction-grade sand. Then I I put in 2 inches of manure, then hand-sifted dirt and did layer of dirt, peat moss, and clay sand until I had that bed filled up. That was a lot of work. But I don't have to worry about moles coming into my thing. So in that,
Don't have worms?
worms will, but I don't have moles because moles can't get through the chicken wire. So when I plant that, I use my favorite tool and I make my row, and I'll plant my parsnip seeds every 8 inches apart. And then in between that, depending on what I want, I'll either plant a couple carrots or a couple radishes. So if you're going to have somebody do it with you, they need to know exactly what you have where, because I had somebody help me weed once and they weeded out, and I had a nice stand of radishes, but the radishes were just markers because radishes will be harvested in 30 to 40 days. So everything else was gone. So I had little tiny carrots that were sitting on my compost bed. And it's my fault because I didn't let them know, what's in there. So you need to know what you're planting. And if you have somebody else help you, they need to know exactly what you're putting where. So, and a lot of things like that, if you're doing a small garden, I love to use trellises. I use a climbing green bean. So I have this big trellis. I run 2 fence posts 3 feet apart, 6 feet away, 2 more fence posts, and then I use 16 foot of farm fence and swing that up. So I stand underneath and I'm picking green beans, and I don't have to get down on my hands and knees and go through the thing. The nice thing about that also is I have a lovely shady area underneath. You can put your lettuces and your shade-loving plants for your garden inside of that, and it gives them protection. Okay. Anybody want to come up and look at the dirt?
Any more questions?
Any more questions?
If you want to plant any vegetable in a container, any special instructions for that? And also, if you want to plant fruit trees, do you have to prepare the soil kind of like?
Fruit trees need to have the soil prepared a little bit. You're going to have to feed those initially. You need to know what your soil is as far as your pH and how nutritious that is. You're going to need to make sure that you have full sun. You can't have any shade for that. Container plants. Containers are fine as long as they're large and they have good drainage. You want to put like rocks underneath, and I'm talking like a big container. You would put rocks under, or first thing you put inside the container is rocks or something for drainage. Then you put in something a little smaller, and then you start mixing in. I like to use like a layer of peat moss on the bottom just to keep everything from going through, to make like a mat. And then you start mixing in your soils and get that in there. Anything that you're using a container for, what kind of a container are you using? If you're using a plastic container, you're going to want to water less than a ceramic, like a clay pot that breathes. Certain things like any type of material that's going to let your water leach out, you're going to have to be cautious of not getting enough water for that. Because especially when we get summertime, you're going to have a lot of watering issues. When I grow tomatoes, because I always hear people going, oh, we want to put tomatoes in containers. Tomatoes need lots of root space. They need lots of stable ground to grow. I make fence cages out of farm fence, this big around, drive them into the ground, they're 4 feet high, and my tomatoes climb. If your tomatoes are going to lay on the ground, you're going to lose half of them. And same thing, who wants to bend down and pick tomatoes when you can pick them chest high?
For compost, at the end of the season, after, should you take some of those tomato plants and put them in the compost, or is it better not to because of pests and stuff like that?
I take all of my vegetables and they go into a special pile, and because I live out in the farm, I burn them. You do not want to use plant material for compost unless you have a thermometer in there and you know that that compost is getting over 150 degrees, because you will be bringing disease into that. And usually plants have some type of seeds in them. If you have, like, say you throw in your tomatoes, you have small tomatoes that are on there. Now you have a seed problem, so you're going to get volunteer tomatoes all over. Volunteer tomatoes, usually, I'm not going to say always, but mostly, you're going to get some weird. I had this one volunteer tomato came up, and it was a beautiful plant. I was like, oh, I'm going to give this thing a go. It had beautiful looking tomatoes. They literally tasted like, it reminded me of Revelation. I spewed it out as soon as I put it in. It was the most nastiest tasting thing I had ever tasted. There was no flavor. It was just like, blah. So you want to, in answering to that, any of my vegetable plants that are done for the year, I put them in a pile, let them dry, and then I burn them, and then that ash goes back in the garden. Any more questions? Yes?
We talked a lot about deers getting into the garden. We get deers in our yard, even in Wilmington, and we're in a neighborhood. They'll stand right out there and just as big as you please. I don't know where they come from. But we also have rabbits, squirrels, groundhogs, whatever, gophers, and you name it around there. What about those animals? Because I know they like to eat things too.
Get a big dog.
Well, we don't have a dog, but
seriously, like she said, use whatever barrier method you can use, anything for like your gophers and stuff. I know it sounds silly, but I've had success with a fake great horned owl. I had a plastic one, and you get the kind that move, and it wiggles around, and you put a little thing underneath of it so that every time the wind blows, it spins it around. Animals that are causing mischief like that, they don't like something that moves. I take an old work shirt that I don't wear anymore, and I'll wear it during, and I hate to say this, I'll wear this outside on a hot sunny day and get my perspiration on that. Then I hang that up over a fence, and I'll shove some stuff in there, and they smell me on that. And it lasts until it gets rain on it. And, anything like that you can do.
we have groundhogs, skunks, and so what we did is we did a electric fence that was about this far off the ground. And once those groundhogs got zapped the first time, they don't mess with it because they can hear it. So, and it's low enough that we can just step over it. We try not to forget that it's there.
Oh yeah. Electric fences are wonderful.
And there's some really nice ones now that are solar operated, so you don't even have to run a cord to them. So they're kind of handy.
So I have one real quick story, because I'm always full of stories. For those of you that know my dad, he was an electrician. He set up an electric fence around the yard, or around the garden, and it was hooked up with it's called a franceformer. It's a neon light transformer. I don't know if you guys remember the neon lights. This thing had 10,000 volts through it, but it was just a really tiny amount of amperage. So it wouldn't fry you, but you really knew if it was there. And so what he did was he hooked this in series with a light bulb. So depending on how strong you wanted this, you could start off with a 25-watt light bulb. And being that my brother and I like to have some fun, we changed that out to a 150-watt light bulb. And you would take a piece of insulated wire and strip the end and put a hook on it. And take a bare piece, and you could zap grass or insects, and you could zap them at 2 inches away. It actually hit a rabbit, and the rabbit got caught underneath, and there it was. So electric fences, if you want to deal with them, they're wonderful. Make sure that you unplug them when you clean the grass around them, because I've lost a few instruments throwing them because you get hung up on that with a machete, and it's not a pretty sight.
That's one of the positives about the battery-operated one. It's strong enough to deter the animals, and then, yeah.
Bigger's not always better.
Yeah. All right, any other questions? I think we'll give Randy a hand for an awesome presentation.
Thank you guys for all your questions and stuff. As I said, if anybody has any questions, wants to come up and look at this stuff,
Let us know when you open up your fruit stand.
Either that or get him to deliver.
that's about 2 years down the road.
Randy, there's a couple of us that are mentioning they'd like to come take a tour. Can we get that set up? Come on, don't give me the excuse. He gives me the excuse. It's not ready. It's never ready. It's always in a grow station.
It's in progress. We'll figure something out in summer.
All right, there we go.
When things are all...
Yeah, let's do a Sabbath afternoon picnic at Randy's house. Yep.
You're going to have to clear that with my wife.
I'll work with her. She'll work with me. Yeah.
Have you seen Cox Arboretum's edible landscape?
Mm-hmm. It's awesome.
It's
yeah,
awesome.
That is a good place. Cox Arboretum, edible landscape. That's a really nice area. Yep.
Things while you're there? No, it's not. I don't think it's for that.
That's
It's just the way they landscape. They landscape with edibles. So
Yeah.
it gives you ideas of stuff.
The docents are the people that volunteer.
the volunteers do some of it. Well, and they have animals out there too that work on them, I think. Oh, that is the fenced-in area. That's right. That's right. They harvest it and take it to the shelters. That's cool too. Okay.